right. Well, it looks like we are 6:05. So we'll get started. We were trying the Zoom format instead of the Facebook Live just to be able to see some faces, interact a little bit more, have you guys be able to ask questions. Ooh, Mary, you guys got your camera working. Hi.
Hi.
So feel free to jump in. We kind of wanted this to be a conversation. This was Jason and Carrie. We see you guys now too.
Oh, good.
This is a hard one. So we had asked you guys for some feedback and suggestions for topics for trainings, and it's one that I think heard from 2 or 3 people talking about the impact of grief on the family and specifically on bio kids. So I've reached out to a few of you guys just on this topic to get some guidance and hear about what this has been like with you guys to help share and educate. It's a piece that I don't know that we do a great job preparing. I'm not sure that there's anything that can really prepare you for what it's going to be like. In prepping for this training, asked my mom just to share with me some of her experiences over the years. And I know my mom said with one of our placements, the sibling group that we had for the longest time, almost 2 years, that I still consider kind of my foster siblings, she actually even went to the doctor the day that they moved. She thought she was having a heart attack. She said that she was just so convinced that something was physically wrong with her, that it hurt that much, which was a piece that she had never shared with me. I mean, this was 14 years ago. And so just how intense that can be, I don't think that there's any way to truly prepare families for that. And it's certainly an individual process, but I think that we can glean from all of you guys some of your experience and help to, just educate and make people aware that they're going to go through this process. We hit grief very briefly in core, and just the general. I think we still show kind of the old video of the giraffe. The DABDA, so denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, kind of those general stages of grief. But foster care grief is a whole nother thing because there's no formal way. I mean, you lose a child, but you don't get to mourn the loss of a child because that child's not dead. They usually have just transitioned someplace else. And sometimes, just because of circumstance, other things, the case with my parents, it was their choice. They decided they weren't the adoptive home for these kids, even though they loved them, and it hurt. And they were on a little bit different pages, which caused some conflict and made things even harder for that specific transition. And then the experience of bio kids through this. So what I'd love to start with, Jenny, is the video. So Jenny put together a video with her kids, interviewing them, asking them some questions about what this process is like, having kids come and go. And I think it does a great job of introducing just some of those questions to think about and to begin the conversation. So, Christy, would that be okay? Be prepared. First time I watched this, I had tears.
What's the hardest part about a foster child leaving our house?
Well, you never get to see them again, probably. And you say goodbye, but then they don't really understand.
The hardest part about a foster kid leaving your house is that it kind of hurts your heart, and they're like always with you when they lived at your house, with you helping them and playing with them, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore, so sometimes it kind of feels like they died.
I think it's hard because it's kind of sad once you get a bond with them, and then they have to leave, and sometimes you cry, but sometimes you don't. It's different for every kid, and especially when you're with them for a long time, then it's super hard to leave them.
One of the hardest things of having a foster child leave our house is that it's like having a friend or a sibling or a family member leave. So you usually see them every day, but now you don't see them, or you see them very little, and you don't get to watch them grow up.
it's pretty hard, but also it's okay to cry like when they leave, and it's okay to feel sad. And it's different for every foster child that you have. And some you cry, some you're just sad. And some you also feel happy for them to be going to a new home or a forever home.
Well, I would tell them that they'll be sad and that it's really hard
Why is that hard?
because you get attached, but then they'll leave and then they won't be there.
It doesn't seem like it'll be super hard when they leave, but then it kind of hits you really hard when you don't expect it. Oh, it gets easier over time. Like after longer periods of time, then you kind of, like it lessens a little bit. So it gets easier as time goes on to kind of not feel as sad anymore.
It doesn't get easier each time, and it will be really hard to have them leave, and it's okay to feel all the emotions that you do, and just know that they're going to a better place. The grief of having a foster child leave impacts me in a lot of ways. You always prepare yourself to be like, I'm not gonna cry this time, it'll be okay, I'll stay happy for them, but it never really works out that way. Sometimes you see their car driving away and you think, oh, that's the last time I'll buckle them into their car seat, or you see some of their things that they left behind and you're like, oh, well, they'll never use that again, and it's just, it is really hard.
Well, I get sad and then I want to see them again.
Grief impacts me by kind of making me sad, and sometimes it makes me less motivated, and sometimes it would even not make me not want to have another foster kid for a while. I kind of don't want to go through like the grief and loss again, so it makes you not want to have another kid sometimes for a little while.
It makes me really sad, and it makes me like feel different, like knowing that they're gonna leave, especially when we've had them for a while and I've bonded really well with them. So it makes me sad and feel almost like a different person.
Whenever a placement leaves, you start thinking about the other people who have left your house and how you felt with them, and sometimes you feel bad because there's people who you don't cry for as much when they leave, and you still love them just as much as anyone else. It's just the grief will impact you differently every time. Sometimes you'll just be thinking about them even when they're already gone, or years to come. You're like, I wonder where they are today and what they're doing. And you definitely think about the kids a lot after they leave, and especially when another child leaves, you think, oh, well, they left, but do you remember when this kid left as well? Sometimes when the foster kid is gone out of your house and their birthday comes around, you think, I wonder what they're doing to celebrate their birthday this year. Are they, like one of our traditions is to get cookies. Are they having cookies this year or something else? Are they even celebrating their birthday? And so you think about how they celebrated at your house, and you think, I wonder how they're doing it this year when they're not with us.
Well, you don't want more placements because then you'll get more sad, because then you'll have to say goodbye to more foster kids.
When a foster kid leaves, does it make you think of others?
Well, it makes me think of the people or the parents who are adopting them or taking them back, and I hope that they'll be the right person for them.
When more placements leave, like in the future, then I kind of think back to all the different kids' situations and when they left, and it's all kind of different, but then it's all kind of the same because you still feel the same things, even though every different kid that you've had, well, they won't be the same. And so you still feel sad in kind of the same ways, but then it'll be a different experience every time.
When I think of one kid leaving, I think of all the foster kids that we've had, and they all come back to me, and I think of happy memories and sad memories, and I think of them as a kid, and it just kind of makes me sad because then I remember them, and then they just still have a place in my heart.
We have this one picture thing on our wall that it's a tree, and then it has a vine growing off of it, and then it has little squares that we put pictures of the kids that we've had in the order that we have them. So kind of every day where you're sitting in the sitting room, you'll be able to think back to all the times with all these kids, because it's right there to remind you all the good times and all the harder times that you've had with them.
It's also hard because every time a placement leaves, you'll think, oh, this will get easier. Saying goodbye will be easier the next time I do it. I'll have more practice. I'll have more techniques on how to say goodbye. And it never does get easier. It's from the first placement we had, when they left, it was super sad. And now even with more placements that I had, they've all been hard in their own way.
When kids leave, I kind of think back to the memories of times that we had with them, and then I just kind of do things that I like to try to cope with the loss that you feel, like doing my favorite things outside and reading and playing games with my family and things like that.
You give them a few hugs, and then we have a book that it's like a goodbye book, and then you write a message in it.
You talked about self-care too. What else do you do for self-care?
Well, you talk about all the good things they have done.
I like to spend more time with them and give them extra love, knowing that they're gonna leave. And I also talk to my therapist about it, and she gives me a few strategies.
Can you share some of those strategies?
Well, she says just take deep breaths, and that it's okay to cry.
We also have this one book that we use that it's called The Goodbye Book by Todd Parr, and in the beginning and ends of it, each of us from our family writes our favorite memories and things that we'll miss and wishing them well when they go.
I like looking at pictures of them and reliving the memories that we did. And also, I think it's good to talk to people about how the child impacted their lives as well as your own.
See, it stopped. Do I get hit that again or what happened? Okay.
Oh, Jenny, thank you. It's so cool just hearing the personal accounts. I love the prompts that go through and ask all of those different questions. I hope all of you guys were kind of asking yourself those questions and thinking of those questions to kind of ask and start those conversations with your kids about what their experiences have been, and what do they do to take care of themselves and some of that part. So I'd love to hear just some reactions from everyone else in watching that, and kind of turn it over to you guys for this conversation, even sharing what you guys personally do with your own family. Jason and Carrie, it looks like you took your off of mute, so you get to be the first up to speak.
Well, no, it's because we're not very good at this and we never muted it.
There you go. And no, it just tells me you're eager. I know you guys are sitting there, you have things to say, and
I think those kids were amazing. I love their answers and how you can just tell they get it. And I think that's so important to be able to talk about it with your kids
And to know, we always say, our family, when kids would leave, we'd say, oh, we're done, we need a break, this is too hard. And then, you know, a week goes by and my kids would just be so ready again. And I think that it's like taffy. Your heart starts as this little hard piece, and as you go, your heart all of a sudden is wrapped around more bodies and things than you could ever have imagined. And I just think it's amazing how the heart can be stretched like that, and that your kids can see that and know that it's okay. And you're filling a space for those kids that have been in your home. You're just filling a space, and you have to know that when they leave, you've done what you can do for them, and hopefully it's the best that they could have had at that moment.
Absolutely. Carrie, since you guys are a mixed household, that you have biological and adopted kids
Yeah.
in your household, can you speak, do you feel that it impacts some of your adopted kids differently than your biological kids?
I think sometimes it does. I think when you say that, Jason, I think sometimes, depending on where the kids are going, that affects especially my adopted kids more. Like they don't want them going back to a situation that they know they could have been rescued from, you know. And so my kids think through that stuff, and I think that's hard for them when they know that they're not going to stay with us forever, and they think about it.
Yeah, I think they're contemplating the spot that they're going back into, because those the adopted foster kids have been in some pretty rough situations, so they remember that. That's a good insight, Carrie, because I didn't think about that, but yeah, I think the reaction is different than I would say our biologicals, and it's very complex. Carrie always says it best, it's very messy, but it's a wonderful mess. So
It's a wonderful mess, and it is really complex, and I can see how it could be potentially a little bit more triggering for some of your adopted kids, and just bringing up some of those old memories and feel a little bit more real to them than some of maybe our biological kids that are a little bit sheltered from what that experience in some of those bio homes is truly like, even though, I mean, they hear the stories and everything.
yeah, and they haven't lived them, right? I mean, so there's a difference between living them, and it's amazing to us the imprints that happen, because our adopted kids were all pretty young when they came to our house, but it's amazing to see the imprints that have happened to even a 3-year-old kid, and you're just amazed at how impactful that is. And you know, I would say honestly, it's our adopted kids from foster care that sometimes resist having more foster kids.
Yeah.
It's our biologicals that are always, it's an easier yes, and it's a little more challenging for them. And in fact, I think one of our adopted kids said the other day, if we get another foster kid, you guys are just going to adopt him. And we kind of looked at him like, wow, okay. So
that's your take on this.
yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I don't know if that is necessarily a universal experience. I know in speaking with Brenda Jenkins, who's not on this one, but has said that it's her adopted kids that have really kind of pushed her to continue and be open, and that they, oh my gosh, have those kids just grown up and thrived so much in that home, but they want to be able to give that safety and security to others. And so I think it is a very kind of kid dependent reaction.
I think so. Yeah. I don't know why, but that was at least the reaction from one of our adopted kids. So yeah. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
So I see some other names that I can't see pictures. Marjorie, you're on here. And one of the pictures I had to show, so I love, Jenny, when one of your daughters mentioned your tree as just a way that it's a visual in your living room, and you see, you know, all of your kids in your current placements get a big picture, and then you have the little pictures down below. This is a picture of it, of different placements that you guys have had that you can look back and see. And it's a great way to kind of memorialize the grief. And also I feel like to give kids that feeling that they won't be forgotten when they leave your home, that they're going to always have that place. They know, you know, their picture is going to go down below, that they're going to still be there and still be seen. Another one, and Christy, I don't know if you found the picture I had taken when I was at Marjorie Albert's home a while ago. a picture of her wall with all of the different kids on it. And it's really fun. I actually took the picture because I was having a great conversation with one of her teens. These are all of the different kids over the years. And some are up there in a few different places, other things. And the conversation I was having with one of the new teens, she was asking, when do I get my picture on the wall? And just wanting that sense of belonging and feeling that it's there. And I think it's also a really helpful piece of kind of dealing with that grief and having kind of those reminders. Although, you know, even as your daughter pointed out, Jenny, it can be hard. It can be hard to sometimes see those faces and can bring up some really kind of raw emotions too. In my office, Christy, you can share, I have an old picture of my foster siblings that were with us for 2 years. So I was an adult and not actually living in the home when these kids were with my family, but I was living close by and helped out a lot and babysat. And I keep it there just as a reminder. And then every summer when I go back, my parents live in Massachusetts, so I don't get to see them often. I talk with Cole, my foster sister, very frequently though. We text back and forth. So this was them as littles. And that picture was about 15 years ago. And then Christy, I think, has the next picture. This was last week because I was home with my kids because they come and spend a few days with us and hang out. And I still get to see them. And that was one of the issues, Jenny, that your daughter eloquently brought up as far as, not knowing that you guys have had continuous contact with some previous placements, but that's not always possible and feasible and whatnot. So I'd kind of love to throw that out there to the group as well about how that impacts the grief process. And maybe, I think it's twofold. It can make it harder and easier having some contact.
I want it to not jump because sometimes our internet jumps. Am I jumping or is it okay?
You sound great right now.
So the interesting thing is our very first placement, actually, we had contact, he was adopted by grandma, and we had contact all throughout the transition to grandma and everything. And then adoption day happened and she cut us off permanently. And my kids never got to say goodbye. And so that was like a wham bam, here we start foster care. And my kids are like, if this is how it's going to be, we're not doing this, because we can't go from having a kid live in our house and then still transitioning with him and visiting him at grandma's until adoption day. And it was hard because I didn't see that coming either, to help prepare my heart to be able to help them a little better. And so after that placement, we've always kind of prepared ourselves that we hope we get to keep in contact, but we may not. And that's not always a choice that's ours. Sometimes it's the family they're going to. And so now at least they know that that can happen. And I feel like though we have couples that we do get to keep in contact with, and it's so exciting for them to get to see the kid grow up and be happy with their either back to or their adopted family. It's also interesting because my kids have kind of noticed that it's been more when they go back with biological family, back with biological parents, usually that's when the communication for us in our situations hasn't happened and hasn't got to continue. And so one of mine said, and it was kind of wise insight, they said, do you think it's because it's a part of their life that maybe they don't want us to remind them that they had this piece of foster care as part of their kids' lives? And I thought that was, who knows, but that was a good insight. And so I think now that we have been able to help them see, like, okay, this may be the end. They've been able to have some processing of grief differently. And so I think that those pictures on the walls, it's actually good, even though it's hard sometimes, because then they'll be like, hey, you remember when so-and-so did this? And do you remember when they were talking the other day, we had a boy that we had a babysitter, and the babysitter actually had to lock all the kids but him in a bedroom while we came home because he was out of control. And they're like, do you remember when we all got locked in the bedroom by the babysitter to keep us safe? And now they can kind of laugh and process, and my older two are starting to babysit, and they kind of process like, could you imagine being that babysitter? And so it's given some really good dialogue to have those pictures. And then I will add that we just got a placement actually on Saturday, and today she came home from school and her picture was on the big picture wall. She wasn't in that picture from Becca because I was printing it, and she was so excited. She's like, I'm on the wall. And I think it's so empowering for kids to see, because it was like, and all the kids noticed, like the minute they walked in from school, every one of them was like, hey, you already printed that picture? And I was like, yeah, because we need to get her on the wall. And so that was something they really resonate with, is having their picture on the wall kind of next to your biologicals. So to say they're at the same playing field and they're not just a foster, which so many of them I think already fill that label in other ways, and at least in your house, if the playing field can be leveled for them. That's just kind of my thoughts of those.
Oh, Jenny, there's so much in that. And I agree. So having it initially, I mean, that's not really kind of the grief process, but just helping kids feel part of the family and feel that sense of belonging is so important. And just those visual reminders. Yeah, I think unfortunately probably is spot on and reflects some of the grief of biological parents, kind of wanting to sometimes close that chapter of foster care and put it behind them. It's not always the case. We do have Mary Live on here, and she, has maintained really great contact and support of several biological families after the kids transitioned back, and has been used for, even ongoing kind of respite and support, and gets to see them. And it's really fun. One of our workers, Carmen, who is, Wimspire foster parent, but I even saw on Facebook today, like they never got to post pictures of this kid when he was their placement, but they get to babysit him now. And she had posted a picture of him eating ice cream and just saying, like, it's so great. Like, I love that, his mom still shares him with us because he did reunite and was successful. And so it's one of those hard, I feel like, barriers to overcome. And it takes a really confident, comfortable biological parent to embrace kind of foster parents. But there definitely are some examples out there, and it's really great when it happens. And I think it can really help with the grief process.
We just sent one home, so it's still pretty raw with us, but we did hear from them today. And he's doing really good. They sent us pictures of him, and
oh, that is just such a solid, like, hearing that, like,
big emotions. My adopted daughter. That helped us see today that they were doing well with him, and it definitely helped our hearts. But
it's hard, and I can hear the emotion in your voice, Mary, and I want to reach out and just give you a hug, because it hurts. It is losing a child and having that kid transition. But typically when you lose a child, you have a ceremony, you have some formal grief. People come over, you get time, they bring you meals, you get to talk about and remember. And in foster care, you don't have any of those formal community support.
yeah, you're right. And with our family, we always try to do lots of special things and send them off. Knowing that they're important. But I always try to share my phone number with the parents, and like you said, we have seen a lot of our kids afterwards, so we try to convince ourselves that we're going to see them, even if we may not. We convince ourselves that, because it makes it a little easier.
Yeah, that piece of hope does make it easier, although as Jenny, you spoke to, it can also make it harder when then it's crushed. And especially with that first one, you really had it and then it didn't happen. And sometimes that hurts even more.
Right.
Becca, I think it's really interesting. We have a lot of seasoned people here. So we have a lot of people who can give us a lot of good insight that have taken lots of placements and
have been with us for years. So Joe, I'm thrilled to see you join us. Hi, I have missed you.
I know, I miss you guys. So I just want to say that I think the biggest thing is just keeping your door always open, because even though they come and go, they always seem to find you later. You know, we have Thanksgiving dinners here that are 25, 45 people in our home at one time, from foster kids to their biological grandparents to their, we've even had biological parents in our home because, when we had one of our teenagers, it was important for her to have her mom come to Thanksgiving, so I think it's about building relationships, and it's about keeping that open. And, when they're ready, they'll find you, even if they're little, and I think that that's the thing that's really important is, we have one that came when she was, oh goodness, I think she was maybe 15 or 16 and had a baby. And she's now, in her 30s, and she still comes around, So I think that's the biggest advice I can give, is just to keep that option always open for them, because when they're ready, they'll find you,
They'll find you, and you have some that it's been years. So there's been years gap, and then suddenly I hear this name again, and I was like, I didn't know you were still having contact. And you were like, well, we hadn't for years, and they reached out again.
Yeah. Well, we have one that lives in Michigan, and she, she'll still touch base every now and then, and not, it's not super often, but, it's just keep that door open, because, you need them to know that it's okay. We had one that got married and went away and came back and lived with us after she got divorced for 6 months because she didn't have any place else to go. And, she's what they're ours in some aspect. And so I think that that's just the thing that you have to always take and remember is, you made an impact in their life for a short period of time, and they'll remember that.
Joe, talk to me a little bit about self-care. So when you do say goodbye to a kiddo, especially in some of the circumstances that it doesn't feel quite ready. The situation makes you feel a little uncomfortable, you're not sure about, or even, one of your kids that, you were her mom and you transitioned to an adoptive home, and a home that you know very well and still get to see all the time, but that role, you had that loss of that role of being a mother.
Sure.
How do you take care of yourself, and how do you deal with
I think it's really important that you plan and have some opportunity to say goodbye. I think that you have to, make it some sort of an event. Some of your kids want a cake, some of your kids want to go out and have dinner, some of your kids just want to have spaghetti, and that's okay. Let them choose, let them figure it out. And then, I always tell my kids when they leave here, I give them my phone number, which they usually know anyway, but I say, if you're ever in a situation, you call me. And we've had kids call us, we sent one home that it was not a good situation, and she called, and we called DHS and went and picked her up and brought her back to our home. And that's not necessarily the right thing to do, so please don't follow in my footsteps, but it was the right thing for us for that one time. And so I think that you have to think about it like you are doing the very best you can do for them while they're there. And then once they're gone, I think that you have to, if all contact is cut, which sometimes happens, you have to just move on to the next one. I think that's our biggest thing, is we move on to the next one a lot, and most of our kids, please know, they still are in touch with us. We still know where they're at. We still check in on them. But I think that you just have to do things that you love to do, read or take baths. And sometimes as foster parents, we don't get to do that when we have kids at home. And so, make sure you're taking care of you and making sure you're taking care of your relationship, because, going out to dinner with your husband. Eric and I went to a concert a couple nights ago, and we hadn't been anywhere in months and months and months, just the two of us. We just don't do that. But I think you have to remember to take care of you, and that's important.
And that's a great message. And I like that, take care of you, not just, you know, when that grief is really hitting you and you're saying goodbye, but throughout the process.
Yeah,
Really
I agree.
have that foundation.
Mhm.
For sure.
Yeah. And you can always live on a baby. That always works too.
Babies help bring those smiles.
Hey, Bubba. Hi. Hi, beautiful baby. Smile at Becca. Smile at Becca. Say hi, Becca. Say hi, Becca.
Sorry, I heard you starting to chat, but it was hard to hear.
I'm going to turn mine off.
I think it's also important to listen to the bios about that self-care they need. So we've been foster parents for about 5 years, and we've honestly never taken a break between placements. We've always had one transitioning in as another is transitioning out. And we just had about a 5-week break. And it was interesting because my biological kids made a bucket list, they called it, for the things they wanted to get to do with mom and dad before we took a new placement, because we've had a lot of littles come through in the last couple of years. And so like going mountain biking, we go, but it's always mom or dad has to go the speed of a toddler, which is just a different experience for my biological kids are 15, 13, and 2 that are 11. And so they made a whole list, and we were very like diligent at getting through their list. Ariel even called us a couple times and we had to say, we're not quite done with the bucket list that the kids made before we take another placement. And so then when we said yes to this recent placement, the kids were all ready because we got to do everything that they kind of had wanted to. And until this time, they hadn't had a time where they said, hey, mom, can we not take another? They'd always said yes, because we always include them in every placement that we take. But it was just, they reached a point where they wanted to just have a little break. And I was glad that they were able to vocalize that as well, because we talked to them about the placements and keep them as part of the decision making to the best that we can. Obviously, we don't tell the kids' whole story. We just kind of say this is names and ages or whatever. But I just thought it was interesting that they also advocated for their own self-care and then included my husband and I in that piece as well.
Absolutely, Jenny. And I really love and appreciate kind of hearing from families. The Holtz are another one that their teens were like, okay, we need a break after this one. And I'm sorry, at the end of the day, it is my job. And I did call you, I think, on 3 placements during that break. And I'm like, you're like, we're still in the break. Did you actually get to Powderhorn and get to bike down?
Yeah, yep, we did.
Awesome.
You know, I want to just put my 2 cents in about that too. What you don't see is that your children, your biological children, will grow up to be really great adults because you do care. You know, and my children are great people because we did care. You know, it wasn't that I was a great mom. It was because they had compassion and, you know, could think through things and process things and knew what the world was really about, because it's not all a bed of roses, you know. So I think that, you know, looking in the future, your kids will be really good, great, productive people in society because you gave your heart to other kids.
And they experienced that. And Joe, I mean, you have several adult children and they're fabulous, just empathetic, caring kids. And it's also because you're a great mom, not just because you did foster care and exposed them to that, but you taught them those great values. Dominica Steele is another one who I saw on Facebook. Her son posted just a very cool kind of response about, you know, after doing this for so many years, and they're not currently kind of fostering because they have a full house, but that he hopes to be a foster father and he wants to adopt. And just some of those pieces and lessons he's learned from it was a really cool part. And so grief can definitely, you know, transform and help grow our kids, but it doesn't mean that the process is easy. It is hard and heartbreaking. So, hey, I'd love to reach out and hear from some of our newer families. So Heather, I see you and I see Emily down there. You guys both still have your first placements. Emily, you have had to say goodbye or have one kid transition to a different setting that you still had some contact with. Do you guys have anything that you want to add about what this process is like, even hearing it? And Heather, since you guys haven't experienced kids actually leaving, but that's certainly potential, what even that kind of pending potential feels like and how you might be preparing?
I was also
I
going to
haven't really
say,
experienced any of these things just because, you know, my kiddos are stayed and TPR has been completed and we're just waiting on all the other stuff to go through. So just I get behind self-care a lot because it's a lot, especially since I don't have any biological children. This was a whole new rodeo, just getting kids.
Yeah, a whole new rodeo, and going through, you know, even some of that process by yourself without having that support of kids or spouse, you know, adds different challenges to the process. And I know you said that you haven't, I mean, you have had one youth transition from your home, and even when it's on your terms and needed, that can be hard, and you can go through the grief process too. What I found sometimes as a biological kid in a home, that those were some of the ones that I had the most guilt associated with if I had voiced any opposition or support in having a kid leave the house. And so the overlap of guilt and grief, I think can add a whole nother aspect to it and can be really hard and not one that's easy to kind of voice and explore and know.
I just want to say too, I think what you just said, Becca, is huge, that all of our kids are going to feel different things, getting new placements in. And I think that's why we have to be so diligent about and intentional about knowing the kids that are ours, that are not just biological, but our adopted kids, and knowing what they can handle. They might say, no, I don't want it. Well, it might be my 15-year-old son just being a turd. So, you know, you have to take that into account and say, well, is this something really that's going to affect him, or is he just being selfish for a minute, you know, and know your kids. And I think that's part of that self-care, knowing, are you taking care of yours, you know, because you have to take care of yours before you can take care of others coming in. And I just think that's really important, to know your kids and know what their threshold is, know what they can handle. And I think like Jenny's kids said, it gets easier with each one, and then it doesn't get easier with each one. And you kind of get not used to the process, but your kids know what to expect almost more every time. And each kid is different, and each kid leaving is different, of course, right? So it's going to be different emotions all over the place. I think you just have to talk about it a lot. And, you know, we pray for these kids after they're gone. They're up on our board for a long time. And we'll sit around and tell funny stories, like you were saying about the kid biting. You know, it's just hilarious. It might be a kid that irritated every single one of us, but we miss them and we love them. And it's fun to sit around and talk about them. And that helps the grief too, I think, with the kids. But I think just knowing your kids and knowing what they can handle, and knowing that their time is important too. But ultimately, us as the parents have to be the ones that make that decision, because we do know what's best for everyone in the home.
I would also add that our kids have been the biggest and the easiest way to cope with the grief after you have some of your foster kids leave. And, you know, I don't know Emily, but hearing Emily's story is really all too common, is, you know, parents going after these foster kids and having a great hope of adopting, which I think is a wonderful thing. And then just seeing their hearts being laid out on the table and pounded on, because they lose them so often in the process because it's so messy. And I think, you know, I can't understand that grief, because I think Carrie and I have always had our own kids. Well, I won't say that. We had foster kids before we had our own kids, and it was really hard. I mean, incredibly hard. If we were to share that experience, it was 100% different than what we have dealt with after we had our own kids. And so I don't, you know, probably you have a tough job, Becca, when it comes to helping some of these parents that go into this as foster adopt without their own kids, to help them through the grief of really losing kids back into the system. So I would just say that's got to be a big deal. Yeah, that's got to be hard.
Jason, that is so insightful. And I think you are spot on. And hearing, I mean, you kind of confirm some of what Jenny said too, you know, even they went back after this hard transition, you know, and really focused on their family and had some time with kind of just their unit, and going back and having those connections with your own kids. And I hadn't thought about it being a very different experience when you don't have your own. I think it explains why we have several families that do start as those foster to adopt. And once they kind of have that first adoption, then we have a lot of families that stay and are able to really successfully transition into foster homes after that, and are more okay with kids that have the greater potential for the in and outs, because they do have that security of already having, their kid. Because they've had
Yeah, and it's huge. I think, well, we know because we were on both sides of that. And when those kids leave, it's hard. But when you have your troops to fall back on, and like Harry said, to have those conversations. And, we remember an Austin kid that was at our house. I mean, he was one of the honoriest but funniest kids ever. And we haven't had him for years, and we share stories still to this day about some of the stuff we did. And without our kids and without that conversation, I think it'd be harder, and the grief would be more difficult. So I think we have a huge advantage. Those of us that have kids at home have a huge advantage in coping with the grief of watching these kids go back and go home. So
huge advantage, but it also just makes me kind of think of that community aspect. And so, where else do people get those supports, whether it's through churches or schools or friends, family, and just that importance of those relationships. It's really cool. We see a lot of families that even connect through work because you guys understand each other in a way that, people who haven't lived in this world, it's hard to understand what that is like, and support each other through some of those transitions.
Yeah.
So Becca, I think it's also important to share with other foster families, like to reach out to those people that are in your circle, and for case managers to know it's okay to share our information with other foster parents. Hold on 1 second.
One in the background, but it's a great point, Joe, and just that importance of, connecting and helping to build some of those supports when that a transition's coming, and a transition is a really hard one.
And I had a caseworker just recently reach out to me, a DHS caseworker, and she said, I have a family that's really struggling with their new foster home. Can I share your information with her? And I was absolutely. So I think that that's another thing just to think about and remember, is that we all are experiencing the same things. And so reach out to another one that you've connected with, or ask for somebody who you can connect with so that you can kind of just talk it through. And remember, your first one is always the hardest and always will be the one that pulls on your heartstrings the most.
Oh, it's great advice, and just that importance of connection is so real. Brendan, you were with us at the beginning, and I saw your picture. I don't see you anymore, but you guys have had several kids in and out, and then you have that combination family as well, in the same way, as Joe and Case Bolts, with having, an adopted kiddo and a biological. Can you speak to just what that impact's been on your family with grief of having kids come and go, and how do you support your kids and yourself through that?
I know with our biological daughter, Violet, that she just gets attached really quick. Like we have some right now that they're her sisters.
She loves them.
Yeah, she says she loves them. Sorry. There's Michelle too.
Hey, Michelle.
And we had some kiddos for over a year and 2 days, I guess. We had them exactly a year and 2 days, but there were 4 of them. We had one when we got him when he was 2 days old. And they still talk about how they miss those kiddos. And we'll find a toy and be like, oh, can we get it back to them? So, they miss them for sure.
And it's hard. And what I love is just that open conversation. And she knows that she can, talk about them and bringing it up. And that's a theme I feel like I've heard from every one of you guys, just, keeping that conversation and that dialogue open.
Yeah. And then also with keeping the dialogue open with the other kiddos, like we had the twins, who we're talking about, Becca, that left us like 2 years ago. One of them actually reached out to us on Messenger like 2 weeks ago and apologized for how everything went. And we apologized for how everything went. But just knowing that we touched them still and that they were able to reach out,
Very cool. And they both, I mean, they transitioned from our other home. So Marjorie, they were at your house, but then we're independent. And I know they've maintained contact with you as well. Marjorie, you're another one who I feel like kids, holidays, you never know whether you're going to have a small intimate family gathering of, 3 or 4 of you, or whether there might be, 20 around the tree. And just such an important piece. I love hearing, Joe here, just keep the door open. Brendan, that warms my heart that she reached out. I'm not even sure which one, but I love that. And I love that they know that they can reach out. And yeah, and even when things are hard, because the reality, family is hard. It's hard. Oh man, my bio son today had a major meltdown and we had some conflict, and you make some mistakes and you're not always the perfect parent as a foster parent or biological parent or whatever it is. And I love hearing you say, she apologized, we apologized, we, just reconnected. And that's huge. And I think helps with that grief process.
I think it also says a lot about how you guys fostered them, because they weren't scared and they knew that they could. They knew, like, if they reached out, you guys would respond. So that's really sweet.
Let me see. Any thoughts just to end this conversation? Last pieces that you want to share, advice you want to give to some of our newer families that hopefully get to watch this later?
Always know that the aerial caseworkers are always there for us, is what Michelle says.
If we need to talk, they're there.
And we're there, but at the end of the day, we don't always understand what you're going through either. It's a personal process. And so, we want to be there and support you. And so please, yes, keep that dialogue open and let us know if you need something and if we can do something better, different, or whatever that is. Because we want to support you, but again, don't always know what that looks like and what the need is.
I think my kids said it at the end of their video, but they said, even though it's really hard, it's worth it. And I would agree with them. It's worth the grief to be able to help kids get to their next spot or to back to their biological families, and to see them just be able to heal while they're with us and be able to move on.
Oh, Jenny, and that's the perfect note to end on. Yes, even though it's hard, and it is going to be hard and heartbreaking, and there are going to be tears and struggles and everything else, that it is worth it. And that's why, you guys are all here, and that's why as workers we're here too, because there's grief even with watching kids come and go from homes, and we become attached. Oh, well, thank you guys. Thank you. Please, you guys do some self-care. Even just talking about grief, I think brings up, I'm getting flooded with memories of different kids and things. And so make sure to take